Chapter 5 Christmas was slowly approaching. Well, Yule actually, as Eliza had learnt, and Hogwarts had been swept up in the festivities. Seeing the Christmas season celebrated so happily was a bit of a novelty to Eliza, and at first she took great delight in the gigantic Christmas trees, the tinsel and the icicles strung up around the grand castle, but soon the sights became dull, and Eliza grew tired of being cold in the draughty castle. She had taken to wearing extra layers beneath her uniform, especially in potions, where without the roaring fire of the slithering commons the dungeons were terribly cold. "I do feel sorry," Malfoy said quietly in potions one day, "for all the people who have to stay at Hogwarts over Yule because they're not wanted at home." Evidently, he was still bitter about losing his standing in the court. He had yet to make any moves to reclaim his position at least, but Eliza knew she would have to act soon. Their year mates were divided between two possible leaders, and that never made for a strong court. But it was true. Eliza wasn't leaving Hogwarts over Yule and had jumped at the chance to stay over break. Not only did the orphanage pale in comparison to Hogwarts, or anything really, the thought of living away from magic longer than she had to made something in Eliza burn with anger. Eliza was just walking around the corner on her way back from her biology, planning to drown herself under the hot water of a shower to get warmth back into her numb limbs, when she almost walked right into Hagrid, who was blocking the corridor. Staying quiet, Eliza moved around the man, not drawing attention to herself, as she listened in on the conversation between Hagrid, Weasley, and Granger. "We just want to know what Fluffy is guarding Hagrid." Fluffy. Was that the name of that infernal dog on the third floor? "Yeah, Hagrid. We know it's something to do with Nicholas Flamel, right?" Eliza felt her brows furrow as she walked past them without being noticed, heading down to the commons. Flamel. Wasn't he an alchemist or something? What was it he had created? Eliza racked her brain as she walked into the commons, nodding and greeting at Theo and Blaise as she headed to her dorm. The Philosopher's Stone. Surely the headmaster wouldn't guard an artifact that powerful in a school full of children, would he? Of course he would. Eliza could only hope she wouldn't get caught up in the old fool's plans. Eliza was one of the few Slytherins staying over Yule break. Most of the students went home to celebrate Yule with their family and attend the famous Malfoy Yule Ball, the closest thing anyone had left of their traditions. She woke up later than usual and sleepily made her way down to the common room, planning to curl up with a book by the roaring fire, only to jump in surprise when she saw the commons occupied. A large pile of presents spread out around the small tree in the corner. "Ah, and she wakes," Aaron Roll exclaimed as she appeared in view from where he was slumped in her favorite armchair, with his legs flung over the side, brown hair lying in a rather impressive bed head. Roll was the Slytherin king this year. He had been the ruler of his own court since he was a first year and now presided over the whole of Slytherin. He was a fair and intelligent leader, and Eliza honestly couldn't fault him that much. She just knew that they could be better. "You have presents," Gemma Fawley says from her spot by the tree, a stack of multicolored boxes beside her. "Presents?" Eliza said, slowly confused. She had never had presents before. Roll and Fawley exchange a concerned look, and Roll stands up to shepherd her to the tree. "Yes, presents. Not many Slytherins stay behind for Yule, so for those of us that do, we open our presents together as a family," Roll explains, and makes her sit down by the tree to form a makeshift circle. "We've been waiting for you," Fawley says with a grin and gestures to a small stack of presents Eliza hadn't noticed before. She knew it was no coincidence that the King of Slytherin was at Hogwarts this year. He must have heard Eliza was going to be the only Slytherin staying behind and signed himself up. Fawley was also one of the only older members of Slytherin who she had had a positive interaction with. Eliza wouldn't lie to herself and couldn't deny the feeling of warmth she felt when she realized they stayed behind so she wouldn't be lonely, stayed behind because they cared. It was a new sensation, having people care about her, but she found she quite liked it. "Let's begin," Roll exclaimed jovially before frantically tearing into his large pile of presents. It was so unlike the usual stern and intelligent demure he projected it startled a laugh out of Eliza. "We always drop the pretenses at Yule. Who can be bothered with scheming when there's presents?" Fawley explained, jokingly looking up from her teetering pile of presents. Eliza nodded thoughtfully and turned to her own pile of presents, Although small in comparison to the others, it was still more than she had ever had in her life. The first few were simple boxes of sweets from the girls in her dorm, a favor Eliza had returned so as to keep the somewhat tentative peace they had built. There were 3 more after that, each with their own notes. Eliza picked the first one off the pile and curiously read the letter. Merry Yule, Eliza. I know how much you've expressed an interest in our traditions, and I hope this will help answer your questions. Make sure to never read it in public, though it might not be strictly, well, legal yours. Blaze. Eliza huffed a laugh and opened up the boys presents her breath-catching as she ran an eye over the large leather-bound tome. She couldn't wait to read it and reverently put it aside, ignoring the looks Roll and Fawley exchanged. She doubted they were ones to care about legality and were probably more surprised over the reading material itself. She turned back to her presents and opened the next note. Dear Eliza, Merry Yule, I hope you enjoy the day and don't cause any trouble. As a fellow book lover, I am sure you won't disparage the gift I have chosen to give you. I hope you can gain some valuable insight from it, and that you know better than to showcase a morally dubious book in front of the general public. Yours, Theo. Eliza grinned and carefully opened the present, reading the title as the dark green wrapping paper fell away, revealing a 3rd edition copy of The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts Through History. Oh, Eliza had some interesting reading to get through this holiday. An interesting selection of books there, Potter, Roll said appraisingly. Eliza smiled back innocently. Every student has an obligation to broaden their minds. Fawley and Roll both snorted at that, and Eliza grinned back before turning to her last present. She had no idea who could have sent it. She hadn't even been expecting gifts of Theo and Blaze, and she was now extremely glad she had sent them both gifts as well, even if they were a pain to make. Eliza hadn't wanted to spend a lot of her trust fund money. She would have no idea what to buy anyway, so instead, she had created personalized gifts for the two with a hell of a lot of patience and research. She had found all the old etymology and ancestry books in the library in hopes of finding the other boys' house crests. Eventually, she had found them alongside a wealth of knowledge about everyone else's family lines, including hers. She had then taken some blocks of glass from the transfiguration supply cupboard under the guise of losing her needle in class, and had spent hours painstakingly transfiguring the glass into the animals from their respective crests. The Knot families being a red knot bird, and the Zabinis surprisingly being a wolf. She had then carved a few simple runes into the bottom of the figure so that they would glow red if someone tried to intrude their owner's space, an arduous task, but completely worth it. She ripped off the packaging of her last present under the curious eyes of Roll and Fawley and studied the cloak that had fallen into her lap, confused. Why would someone send her a cloak? She shifted the paper out of the way and grabbed a note that fell out of it. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time I returned it to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas. It wasn't signed, but Eliza had a feeling she knew who had sent it anyway. She shook the cloak out again and threw it over her shoulders curiously before gasping in surprise. She was invisible. I'd store that somewhere extremely safe if I were you, Roll advised, staring at her wide-eyed. Invisibility cloaks are hard to come by. Eliza nodded seriously in return, folding the cloak up and running her hands over the silky material. It was simply amazing. Eliza's wonderment was interrupted when Fawley spoke. Now who wants to help me break in my new chess set? He asked, looking at the pair of them. Eliza smiled wickedly and shoved Roll out of the way playfully as she took a seat across from Fawley. It had been a while since she had had the opportunity to completely thrash somebody. The day passed quickly after that, and soon Eliza was back in her room, the invisibility cloak laid out in front of her, and feeling an oddly curious itch to go exploring. Use it well. Eliza suddenly felt wide awake. The whole of Hogwarts would be laid at her feet, open to her with this cloak. Throwing on the cloak with an uncharacteristic giddiness, she set off out of the common room to go exploring. She wanders around the castle aimlessly. It feels different at night. There's a silence that clings to the halls that makes Eliza feel like she's intruding. She walks up staircases and ducks in and out of corridors as she discovers more and more shortcuts until she feels something pulling oddly on her magic. When she was younger, she had learnt about sirens in Muggle school, how the mermaids would call out with their voice and lure sailors to their deaths. There was something in this corridor that put that thought in Eliza's mind. The foreign object's magic was trying to ensnare her, lure her into following it. So Eliza does. She walks further down the drafty hall, letting her feet guide her instead of thinking about where she wants to go, until she came upon a door slightly ajar. She walked into the room tensely, but she couldn't deny she was curious. At first glance, it appeared to be another disused classroom, abandoned desks and chairs scattered about the room. But why would an abandoned classroom door be opened? She scanned the rest of the room until her gaze landed upon the opposite wall where a grand mirror stood. It was magnificent, standing on two clawed feet, and an ornate gold frame, and Eliza knew instinctively that this was the artifact that had been calling her. She moved forward cautiously, reading the inscription that had caught her eye. Erest stra eruoit ube cafruoit on wosi. It wasn't like any language Eliza knew of, and it took her an embarrassingly long minute to realize that the words were simply written backwards. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. Eliza dropped her cloak and stepped in front of the mirror. Her reflection stayed for a moment before shifting, the glass looking as though it rippled as the image changed. It once again showed her reflection, but this time she was older, standing in fine-looking wizard robes. There was a happiness in her eyes, a satisfaction that Eliza didn't think she had ever seen before. But most of all, this older reflection of Eliza looked powerful. Nobody would be controlling her. She was free. Eliza felt determination flare within her. That is what she wanted, what every step she took was in aid of. And one day she knew she would get there. She didn't need a mirror to tell her that. Eliza nodded to herself and took a step back before whirling around when her magic flared in warning. So I see you, like hundreds of others, have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erest, Dumbledore says when Eliza finally sees him. Eliza knows she would have heard him come in, which means he must have already been in the room waiting for someone to find the mirror, waiting for her to find the mirror. I'm sorry for breaking curfew, headmaster, it's just, she goes to say earnestly, every inch the embarrassed student she think he wants to see. Her excuses are cut off when he laughs softly. Yes, the temptation of being invisible, I imagine, is too hard to resist, he says, winking when he spots the cloak by her feet. So he sent it to her after all, and she had fallen right into his plans. She plasters a delighted grin on her face to cover up the disgust she feels inside. Have you figured out what it does? I show not your face, but your heart's desire, she murmurs, keeping one eye on Dumbledore and the other on the mirror, which shows her 20-year-old self glaring angrily at the headmaster. Very good, Eliza, he commended, and Eliza tried not to cringe when he used her first name. She could not seem combative towards him, not now, not when she had no way of winning the warfare that was to come just yet. But this mirror neither gives knowledge or truth. Many have wasted away before it, driven mad by what they see. I see my parents, sir, Eliza murmurs with a hopeless desperation, remembering how little Eliza used to feel when she had been locked in that cupboard waiting for heroes who would never arrive. She had outgrown that cupboard, and she had outgrown that girl she used to be. But Dumbledore could not know that. Dumbledore nods solemnly at her words, but something about him, something in his eyes or in his benign smile, seems a bit more at ease than before, probably happy to know his hero is not as wayward as he thought. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Eliza, and I must ask that you do not go looking for it. It does not do well to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Eliza nods in response, not meeting Dumbledore's eyes, as she gathers her cloak and leaves the room, wishing the headmaster good night. She may have fallen into Dumbledore's trap, but he had also just fallen for hers. Eliza is reunited with Blaise and Theo as the Yule break ends, and is shocked to be enveloped in a hug off the two of them as they thank her for her gift. Eliza shakes them off, rolling her eyes at their sentimentality, but inside she is actually quite touched. She then spends the next week pulling the two boys into conversation every chance she gets over the books they had sent her. Yule doesn't even use blood magic. Why was it banned? Dark Lord this, Dark Lord that. What even makes someone a Dark Lord? Why is magic even classified as light and dark? When did that happen? Her questions were never ending, and although the books answered, many of the mothers arose to take their place, and Theo and Blaise were struggling to answer them all. It was the first Friday since term had started, and she and Gemma were playing chess. A habit started over Yule break when she decided to ask the older girl a question. Gemma, why are some spells classified as light and some as dark? And please, don't tell me it's because of usage like Theo said, because I could kill someone with a Wingardium Leviosa. Gemma stared at her for a few moments, and then stared at her a bit more before muttering something that really sounded like, "I am not equipped to deal with this," to herself, and shouted, "Aaron, roll over." Aaron looked up from where he was holding court and wandered over to them, ruffling Eliza's already wild black curls. The three of them had grown rather close over the holidays. Eliza didn't mind. It could only benefit her in the long run. "Ask him what you just asked me," Gemma said, ignoring Eliza's utter confusion. "Why are some spells classified as light and some as dark?" She repeated again, turning her eyes onto Roll instead. Roll blinked, looking as though he was pondering the question before saying, "Usage." Gemma laughed when Eliza scowled. Eliza grabbed her wand, and in one fluid motion cast a tripping jinx at a passing Slytherin second year, who stumbled with a loud curse. A tripping jinx is classified as a light spell. It's even taught to first years. But if I were to cast it, say, when someone was walking down the stairs, I could easily kill them, so don't try and tell me classification is down to usage. Roll sighed, slumping down into the chair besides Gemma, running a hand down his face, as if he wished Eliza would just be a normal first year and not make his life harder. Okay. The idea of classifying spells is really a newer concept for the wizarding world, and really only began appearing in Grindelwald's rise to power. Classification makes it easier to ban certain types of spells, and was essentially created out of fear. Eliza nodded as Roll spoke. Most of what he had said aligned with her reading on the topic. However, there is a difference in regards to some magic, which is how the distinctions began in the first place, even though the distinctions were typically associated with having a light magic core or a dark one. Eliza felt herself perk up as she listened to Roll. Finally, she was getting somewhere. Dark magic is easier to cast for people with dark cores and vice versa. The difference between dark spells and light is that darker spells are usually cast with intent. Roll carried on before Eliza could interrupt. "Of course, by now you have probably figured all magic needs intent to work. But this is slightly different. With darker spells, you have to want it to happen. With most dark spells, you are actively giving something of yourself up, whether it be an emotion, a desire, or blood, which is the case with blood magic. With most light spells, however, you are directing your magic at something else. You are displacing it. Like you illustrated earlier with the tripping jinx, it's directed outwards instead of inwards, but as it doesn't demand much of the caster, they are never usually too powerful or permanent." Roll finished explaining with a sigh, rolling his eyes. "So you can see why most people just stick to usage." As an answer, Eliza nodded her head in agreement in a contemplative silence. Roll had succeeded in explaining what had been troubling her and had given her a lot to think about. If darker magic was fueled by sacrifice, then it made sense that it had a stigma around it, especially after so many Dark Lords. Returning back to her chess game, she pushed her queen forward to put Gemma's king in a checkmate. That would just be one more thing Eliza would have to change. It was late January when the tensions in Slytherin finally boiled over. It had started earlier that week. Eliza's things going missing, being tripped in the hallways, having food thrown at her in the great hall. They were only a small court, but Blaise could work fast, and soon he had found that the underclassmen court weren't pleased with Eliza, that they were planning to put her back in her place. Theo had instantly reached for his wand, a cold look in his eyes as he swore to deal with whoever tried to touch her. His violence was sweet in a way, and Eliza had smiled indulgently. No one in her court would be put into a position like that just yet. This would be her fight. It all came to a head that Friday. She had gone through the entire day having her notes wrecked, belongings stolen, and being spattered in the corridors, and had simply weathered the storm. Although she did feel her temper spike when Theo's cauldron was sabotaged in potions, but she allowed calm to fill her again. She would not go into a fight angry. Giving in to your temper was giving up your chance to win. She walked into the Slytherin Commons that night with Theo and Blaise by her side, her wand up her sleeve and violence in her step. And here she is, the orphaned runt herself. Bletchley hollered at the rest of the Slytherins who stood in a circle forming a dueling ring. Oh, look, she's got her little lap dogs with her, Hestia Caro simpered to her left. I bet she dosed them with a love potion, didn't you, little mudblood? Flora Caro said back, twittering. Behind the 3 second years stood 2/3 years, who Eliza didn't know, and the Prince of Slytherin himself. Rosier was the leader of the underclassmen court, and in Eliza's humble opinion, a right tosser. It seemed Eliza was going to have to make her power play a lot earlier than she had thought. Looking around at the rest of the room, it was obvious the upperclassmen court were staying out of this, and Eliza knew she had Roll to thank for that. Even now the odds didn't appear to be in her favor, even with all the spells she had read. Darker hexes usually couldn't be found in the library, and so Eliza was left to struggle by herself. Is there anything else you want to say to me, or are we actually going to do this? Eliza drawled, flicking her wand from her sleeve and gesturing for Blaze and Theo to back down. She could do this. After all, she had tricks up her sleeve that no one knew about it. One of the Caro twins fired the first curse, some sort of cutting spell, and Eliza immediately leapt into action, darting and moving across the ring. The two Caros moved in unison, and Eliza had to duck before sweeping them off their feet with a well-placed kick, making them hit the ground. She rolled out of the way of another curse and cast a Lumos Maxima in the direction of the others, grinning when she heard them shout as they were blinded. She cast an overpowered Scourgify at Hestia, who dropped to the floor, clutching her face, wailing in pain. In Flora's moment of distraction, Eliza cast a quick Petrificus Totalis and grabbed the twins' wands before anyone could help them. Bletchley had recovered from the Lumos and was now trying to sneak up behind her. Eliza stayed still for a few moments, surveying the 2/3 years who were now moving to surround her. Rosier hadn't even moved to join the fight yet. Overconfidence would be his downfall. Thinking quickly, she cast a Bombarder at the feet of the 3rd years and twirled out of the way of a Defindo cast by Bletchley. Eliza spun and cast Expelliarmus at Bletchley, hoping to catch him off guard, and grimaced when he dodged. She attacked again before he could even think of another spell, and this time her Stupefy hit him straight in the chest. She stole his wand before the 3rd years got over their shock. Stupefy was a 4th year spell. She shouldn't have been able to cast it. But that had never stopped her before. Eliza hopped back over Bletchley and kept her eyes trained on the 2/3 years, who were both glaring at her, wands shaking with barely repressed fury. They cast a hex Eliza had never heard of, and was extremely glad she had dodged it when the spot she had been occupying burst into roaring flames. She cast an Expelliarmus and Body Bind curse in quick succession and smiled when the burly boy dropped to the ground. There was just one left now. They traded spells, hexes and jinxes, lightning quick, as they danced around the room, their attacks getting more and more vicious. Eliza could feel her heart pounding in exhilaration, grinning as she attacked. The 3rd year had just tried to cast the gouging spell, and Eliza took great pleasure in casting a Glacius at his feet, laughing when he slipped and fell, knocking himself out. You mudblood bitch, Rosier snarled viciously, finally joining the fight. Cruci Eliza didn't let him finish his spell. Instead, she stood unnervingly still and let her raw magic uncurl lazily around her. She breathed in deeply, smelling the faint scent of ozone as she let her magic fill the room. It had been a long time since she had let her magic out so unrestrained like this, not channeled through her wand, but pure and raw. She wrapped it around the boy's wand arm and slowly made him lower his wand. He was quivering now, trying desperately to regain control over himself, but Eliza owned him now, mind and body. She was in control. Unforgivable. Are illegal, you know, she commented idly, her voice cutting through the stifling silence of the room. I think you should make it up to me, she said, moving closer to him. Bow, she watched happily as Rosier bowed in front of her, visibly straining in his effort to throw off her control. She never thought her time at the orphanage would be good for anything, but she doubted she would have such good control of her magic if she had never been subjected to that particular hell. She smiled when the Prince of Slytherin finally hit his knees in front of her. It had taken her less than a year to secure her rule over half of the Slytherin house, a feat many took the full 3 years to accomplish. And by Merlin, it felt good. She released her magic from Rosier, who slumped forward pathetically, but didn't call it back to her just yet, and instead let it drift lazily through the room. I am now the ruler of the underclassmen court, and I officially take my place. She stated clearly and smiled, turning to face the crowd of Slytherins. I hope by now you've learnt your lesson about attacking me. I will not hesitate to remind you of your place, but that does not mean I am not a fair leader. Most of you under my leadership are aligned with the dark, and you hate me on the principle that I am the girl who lived. Eliza spoke calmly. But despite being the girl who lived, despite what everyone told me about Slytherin, I was still sorted here, to where I belong. I did not succumb to the wizarding's world bias of our house. I ask you to think beyond your bias towards me. Eliza stopped here and smiled at Theo and Blaze before chucking the wands she had acquired back to their owners. You may find that if you listen to me, I will lead us to victory. Eliza would not accept anything less. Severus Snape hated teaching. He hated the sniveling dunderheads who couldn't grasp even the most basic knowledge, and he would love nothing more than to spend the rest of his days living as a recluse without another child or even adult bothering him and disturbing him from his brewing. He knew even if he was able to ever reach a peaceful retirement, Minerva would not let him turn into a hermit. But between meddling old headmasters and Potters, Brat, Severus doubted he would even make it to retirement age at all. First, he had been the unlucky bastard to go and introduce Potter's brat to the wizarding world, just to have his entire world view shaken when he had found her in an underfunded, under-everything orphanage, and every inch the brash and irritating dimwit he had expected her to be, if not a little bit strange. And then she gets sorted into Slytherin, and Severus realizes he's been played a fool. Because this too sharp, too cunning, cold, calculating child he has been confronted with was nothing like the bumbling idiot he had found at the orphanage. The girl at the orphanage had been a fairy tale fool who clung on to happy ever-afters and magic and friendship. The girl that got sorted into his house could only grow up to be a weapon, and Severus could honestly say he had no idea who for. He had seen how she acted when the headmaster was around, of course. She played the crackpot old fool as well as she had played himself, but Severus knew that no golden girl could topple the Malfoys' claim to leadership. He had almost choked on his tea when he had seen her take that seat. And then off she had toddled to visit the resident half-breed oaf Hagrid. He wished he didn't have a life debt centered on protecting such a contrary brat. He wished he hadn't done a lot of things. Severus sighed and poured himself another cup of steaming black coffee. It was finally Saturday, and even if he had to attend the Great Hall for meals, he didn't have to see any of the student populace. The thought alone was like soothing balm for Severus' soul. He was running through all the things he would have to do today, marking mostly, whilst also keeping an eye on Quirrell because Dumbledore loved hiring the most suspicious applicants he could find. He took a sip from his coffee, running a cursory eye over the Slytherin table, and abruptly choked on the bitter drink, spluttering as he cleared his throat, because Potter had just taken a seat as leader of the underclassmen court. In one night, she had conquered half of all of Slytherin. Severus went back to staring at his coffee, contemplatively wondering if he could drown himself in it. Anything to escape the hell Potter wrought with every breath she took.